With the bonfire lit, the story begins. The Forbidden Tape, The Curse of VHS. Synopsis. When William Davis, an obsessive VHS collector, finds a rare tape in a thrift store forgotten by time, he has no idea that its contents will be the key to a terrible curse. The video doesn't just contain still images or old films. It reveals horrific events before they even happen. At first, William believes he is facing a manipulated relic, but as the scenes unfold and real tragedies begin to occur, fear sets in. Each new tape brings a new vision and a new inevitable horror. Now William needs to decide whether to destroy the tape or continue watching, condemned to witness future horrors. But what will happen when he sees your own destiny engraved there? The beginning. William Davis was no ordinary collector. He wasn't just looking for nostalgia or entertainment in his vast collection of VHS tapes, but rather rarities that no one else had. His apartment was a true sanctuary of obscure recordings, forgotten films and home productions that never reached the public. One cloudy afternoon, he decided to explore a rundown thrift store on the outskirts of town, a place known for storing strange objects that no one else wanted. That's where he saw the tape. It was at the bottom of a dusty box with no cover, no obvious markings, just a faded label with the date on it. 1709 to 1994, handwritten. The material was old but not irreparably damaged. The owner of the store, an elderly man with a lost look, hesitated before selling it. "Are you sure you want this? Some things must remain forgotten," he muttered, handing over the tape for a ridiculous price. William didn't pay attention to the warning. In fact, it only increased his curiosity. Upon arriving home, excited about his new acquisition, he turned on his old VCR and inserted the tape. The screen flickered. There were drizzles and static noises. For a few seconds, nothing but interference. Then the image stabilized. The recording looked amateurish. It showed a deserted street, lit only by the dim light of streetlights. There was no narration, no soundtrack, no cuts. Just the silent street captured by a fixed camera. William frowned, not understanding the purpose of the video. He made a little progress in recording. Nothing changed. But then, the first anomaly appeared. A woman appeared on the screen, walking slowly down the sidewalk. Her posture was hesitant, as if she felt she was being watched. Seconds later, a car appeared out of nowhere, advancing at high speed. William's eyes widened when he saw the brutal impact. The woman's body was thrown into the air and fell to the asphalt. The camera continued filming impassively without any reaction. No cuts, no censorship, just raw, real death before your eyes. William's stomach dropped. He paused the tape, took a deep breath, and decided to turn off the TV. Was it just disturbing? Footage, perhaps a reenactment of some real accident? He forced himself to believe that, until the next day. When he opened the newspaper, his heart stopped. The news was there, printed on the front page. A woman had been run over the night before, exactly in the place and way that the tape showed. This couldn't just be a coincidence. William couldn't sleep that night. The image of the woman being run over repeated in his mind like an endless echo. What he saw on the tape was exactly what happened in real life. Every detail, the angle, the speed of the car, the expression of terror on the victim's face. The only difference was the timing. The tape had shown the accident before it happened. But that didn't make sense. It was impossible. In the morning, William tried to follow his routine, but anxiety gnawed at his thoughts. He needed to review the recording. Maybe there was something he hadn't noticed before, some indication that it was all just an old video, and coincidentally similar to the real event. Maybe his mind was playing tricks. With shaking hands, he turned on the VCR and pressed play. The familiar hiss of tape resounded across the television, followed by a succession of static and distortions. Then, once again, the image stabilized. Same street, same lampposts, same static camera. Everything was identical to what he saw the night before. But this time, he noticed something new. In the bottom right corner of the screen, there was a digital clock with the date and time of recording, 02/16/2025, 21:32. William felt a chill down his spine. That didn't make sense. The date displayed on the tape was 2 days in the future. He skipped ahead a few minutes in the recording, and then the horror repeated itself. The same woman appeared, walking hesitantly down the sidewalk. The car appeared again and ran over her brutally, leaving her body inert on the asphalt. But this time, William noticed something terrifying. The moment of impact was identical to what happened last night, down to the exact second. His entire body turned cold. If the date on the recording was right, that meant he watched the tragedy before it occurred. This was not a simple coincidence. The tape was showing the future. He paused the recording, trying to process what that meant. If the tape really predicted future events, what else could she show? And, most importantly, why did he find this tape? His heart hammered in his chest, but one question was stronger than any fear he felt. If the tape showed the future, then what would happen if he kept watching? William spent the rest of the night sitting on the couch, staring at the turned-off television. The dim glow of the lamp reflected in his wide eyes, but his mind was far from there. He desperately tried to find a rational explanation for what he had seen. There were many possibilities. Maybe the tape was a setup, a well-elaborated hoax. Perhaps it was an old recording that, by an absurd coincidence, reflected an event identical to what happened the night before. But what about the date? 02/16/2025, 21:32. It was impossible to ignore. The tape clearly showed that the tragedy happened before it actually occurred. This destroyed any logical theory he tried to formulate. Coincidences were not so precise. The next morning, William picked up a newspaper and felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. The main headline detailed exactly what he watched on tape. Victim's name, location of the accident, time. Everything was identical. His stomach turned when he read a detail that had gone unnoticed the night before. The woman's name was Rebecca Langley. He had heard that name before. He ran to his computer and typed her name into Google. Some old news appeared, but one of them caught his attention. It was a case from 1994. A woman named Rebecca Langley died after being run over in the same place and under the same circumstances. William felt a shiver run up his spine. The tape he found also had the date 1994 written on the label. Could it be possible that the original recording was repeating tragedies in time? He stood up suddenly, feeling a wave of dizziness. If the tape really showed future events, then what else could it reveal? He felt an irrational urge to rewind the recording to the end, but he hesitated. What if you saw something worse? What if you saw your own death? Doubts gnawed at him. He needed to know more. I needed to test the tape. But to do so, he would have to make a dangerous decision. Would he continue watching? William felt his breathing become heavy as he stared at the tape inside the VCR. Everything he knew about reality was being crushed by that damn recording. The tape didn't just predict the future. It seemed to preserve a cycle of fatal events. He needed to see more. Needed to understand. With a dry click, he pressed play again. The screen flickered, went through the usual interference, and revealed a new location. Unlike the deserted street in the first video, now the camera was positioned inside an underground parking lot. The room was dark, lit only by the cold ceiling lamps. For long minutes, nothing happened. The scene was unsettlingly silent, as if something was about to emerge from the shadows. And then, a man appeared. He wore a thick coat and walked quickly towards his car. William noticed that the guy was looking around nervously, as if he felt he was being followed. His footsteps echoed through the empty parking lot, increasing the tension of the moment. When he finally got to the car and unlocked the door, a silhouette emerged from the shadows. Someone was hiding there the whole time. The attacker acted quickly. A metallic shine cut through the air, and the man tried to scream, but a second blow silenced him. The sound of the body falling to the ground was muffled by the darkness. killer stood there still, watching the corpse for a long time, as if he knew he was being recorded. William's heart skipped a beat. That scene hasn't happened yet. There was no news of a murder in any parking lot. This meant that if the tape logic was correct, he was witnessing something that was yet to happen. He quickly took out a notebook and wrote down all the details. The car model, the parking structure, the time on the recording clock, 11:47 p.m. that same night. If this was real, then he had a terrible choice to make. Wait and see if the premonition would come true, or try to stop the crime before it happened. Fear and doubt consumed his mind, but deep down he knew he had already made his decision. William was restless. His body wanted to move, but his mind was paralyzed by the shock of what he had just seen. The tape had predicted a death, and he had all the information he needed to test it. Would this be definitive proof that the recording was not a montage? He frantically scribbled down the details in his notebook. Local. Underground parking. Time, 23:47. Victim, man in thick coat. Assassin. Obscure silhouette. Impossible to identify. Throughout the day, William obsessively checked the local news, looking for any mention of the crime. Nothing. No articles, no police reports. This meant that the murder, it hadn't happened yet. His heart hammered against his chest as the clock ticked relentlessly forward. To the 23:30, he opened his notebook and accessed a real-time news website. Updated the page once, twice, 3 times. Nothing yet. 23:45. Time was running out. He felt absurd tension in every muscle in his body. 47. And then the news appeared. Man is found dead in underground parking in the city center. Police investigate possible homicide. William felt the world spin. The blood left his face. With shaking hands, he clicked on the article and saw a photo of the crime scene. It was the same parking lot he had seen on tape. The victim was wearing a thick coat. The tape had gotten every detail right. He stood up abruptly, the notebook fell from his lap, and the pen rolled across the floor. This was not a coincidence. That wasn't possible. But it happened. He staggered back, holding onto the table. His breathing was ragged, his thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. The tape was predicting the future flawlessly. He had seen a death before it happened. And the most terrifying question began to take shape in his mind. What if there were more recordings? William looked at the VCR as if it were a portal to something unholy. And for the first time, he feared pressing play again. William's world was falling apart. There were no more doubts. The tape wasn't a bizarre coincidence or an elaborate prank. She predicted the future. And worse, every scene I watched became real. He needed answers. Where did this damn recording come from? Who produced it? And most importantly, has anyone ever been through this before? With his hands still shaking, he opened his notebook and started digging deep into the internet. Looked for variations like Vita VHS premonitory, recording tragedies before they happen, and films that show the future, but nothing seemed relevant. Until he arrived at an obscure forum about cursed artifacts. It was an old, rudimentary-looking website hidden in the darkest corners of the web. One of the topics caught his attention immediately. The tape that came from hell. William clicked. The author of the post was a user named The Collector, and its message was disturbing. If you have found an unmarked VHS tape with dates that don't make sense, stop immediately. Do not watch. This tape has passed through the hands of others. Before you. I know because I was once one of them. Everyone who had it suffered terrible consequences. If you haven't destroyed it yet, there's still time. If you've seen any recordings, then it's too late. William's stomach dropped. Had other people already seen the tape? He continued reading the comments. Some responses were skeptical, others said it was just an urban legend. But one user in particular, named Holotape, made a chilling revelation. The last owner of the tape was a man named Daniel Hargrove. He was a collector of rare VHS. He disappeared 3 years ago, shortly after posting that he had discovered an impossible video. Nobody ever heard from him again. The only thing left was the VCR turned on and the tape playing on a loop. William felt a chill. Daniel Hargrove. He typed the name into Google and found an article about her disappearance. The article said he disappeared without a trace. The police found his house intact but with strange signs. The TV was on, showing only static, and the VCR was playing an unlabeled tape. It was the same tape. William's heart beat like a mismatched drum. If this recording really passed through other people's hands, then what happened to them? One thing was clear. None of the former owners had a happy fate, and now the tape was in his possession. William couldn't remember the last time he slept well. Maybe it was before I found the tape. Now, whenever I closed my eyes, she found him. The first night after his discoveries, the nightmare came like an overwhelming wave. He found himself inside a dark room with peeling walls and a strong, musty smell. In the center of the room, an old television buzzes with static, emitting an annoying hiss. William tried to move, but he was paralyzed. There was something on the screen. The static slowly dissolved and a figure began to emerge. It was a man, or what was left of him. His face was covered in shadows, but his eyes glowed pale and empty. He didn't move. He looked directly at William, as if he knew he was there, even in a dream. Then the figure's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The video sped up violently, as if someone was turning an invisible fast-forward dial. The image trembled, distorted, as flashes of indescribable scenes appeared amid the interference. Pale bodies lying on the ground, deserted streets bathed. In flickering lights, a digital clock showing 3:33, and then the tape stopped. The TV now showed something that made William's blood run cold: himself. Sitting on the couch in his apartment watching the VCR, but there was a difference. In the reflection of the screen, someone was after him. William woke up with a scream. The room was dark, but he felt like he wasn't alone. His heart was racing, and a cold feeling crept across his skin. He looked at the turned-off TV in the corner of the room. For a second, he was sure he saw a figure reflected on the screen. His breath caught in his throat. He rushed to turn on the light, but when he pressed the switch, nothing happened. The power seemed to have gone out. A low noise began to echo throughout the room. It was the sound of a VHS tape spinning, but he hadn't called anything. The VCR was working by itself, and then the TV turned on. By itself, the image flickered, and for a brief moment before the screen returns to total darkness, William saw something that made him freeze in fear. Your own face reflected on the screen, but his reflection was smiling. William could no longer distinguish reality from illusion. Before, visions were confined to tape. Now, they followed him everywhere. The morning after the nightmare, he avoided looking at the TV. The mere thought of turning it on made his stomach turn. But something had changed. As he headed to the bathroom, he felt an inexplicable shiver. Something was wrong. The steam from the shower fogged the mirror, covering her reflection in a hazy layer. When William wiped the surface with his hand, he felt the air escape from his lungs. He was not alone. Behind him, in the reflection, he saw a man who wasn't really there. A deformed face, partially covered by darkness, watched him with lifeless eyes. Before he could turn around, the reflection smiled. Not a human smile, but a grotesque stretching, as if the flesh of the face were being pulled to the sides by force. William staggered back, slamming into the sink, but when he looked again, the reflection had returned to normal. His heart was racing. The curse was expanding. In the following days, the visions became uncontrollable. In the window of a bus, William saw an accident seconds before it happened. In the reflection of his cell phone screen, he glimpsed a dark corridor and a half-open door. A scene that I didn't recognize it. Yet, the worst moment came when he passed by an electronics store. The TVs in the window were off, reflecting only the street and passers-by. But when William passed them, the monitors came to life on their own. The screens showed himself, standing in the middle of the street. His face was pale, his gaze fixed on something ahead. William felt a chill when he realized that, in the reflected image, he was not alone. Behind him, a dark silhouette emerged from the fog. High, skeletal, waiting. Before I could react, the reflection has changed. Now William was lying on the ground, with eyes open but lifeless. The screeching sound of tires screeching on the asphalt brought him back to reality. He threw himself back at the last second, avoiding being hit by a car that passed at high speed. The driver didn't even try to brake. If I hadn't seen the reflection in time, I would have been dead. The tape wasn't just showing the future. She was pulling William into him. He fell to his knees on the sidewalk, shaking. Now I knew that there was no longer any way to escape. William spent the rest of the day locked in his apartment, the curtains closed, his cell phone on silent. Every screen, every reflective surface, every shadow seemed to hide something lurking. But no matter how hard he tried to escape, he knew he couldn't. Avoid the inevitable. I needed to watch the tape again. His stomach dropped as he put the tape back into the VCR. This time it wasn't just curiosity, it was necessity. If the visions were escaping into the real world, he needed to know what would come next. He needed to anticipate. Maybe, just maybe, there was still time to stop something. With a dry click, the TV flashed and recording began. The familiar hissing sound filled the screen, followed by the flickering of the image. William held his breath. The new recording showed a different environment. It wasn't a street nor a parking lot. It was a cafe. The wooden tables, the large glass counter filled with sweets, the sign with yellowish lights. He knew that place. It was a cafe he frequented near his work. The digital clock on the screen ticked 18:27. In the background of the video, among the customers, was a familiar figure. William's eyes widened. It was Michael Calloway, his oldest friend, someone he had known since college, someone real. William felt his skin crawl. The tape had never shown anyone he knew before. His gaze returned to the screen. Michael was sitting at one of the tables, drinking coffee and playing on his cell phone. Everything seemed normal, until a shadow appeared at the entrance to the cafe. The camera didn't show the face of the person who had just entered, but there was something strange about it. The way he moved, the way he stopped right behind Michael, without him noticing. So, everything happened too quickly. The person pulled out a gun. William held his breath. Michael hadn't yet noticed the danger. The shooter raised the gun, pointing it directly at him. For an eternal second, nothing happened. And then, the shot. Michael fell forward, his cup falling to the floor and shattering into 1,000 pieces. Hot coffee spilled across the floor. The screams echoed, customers ran in panic, and the tape stopped. William's apartment was completely silent. He felt his mouth dry, his heart racing. The clock in the recording ticked 18:27. He looked at the royal clock, 7:42. He had less than an hour. Without thinking twice, William took the car keys and left the house. If the tape was right, Michael would die in less than 45 minutes, and he was the only person who could stop it. William's car tore through the streets like lightning. He only had a few minutes to get to the cafe. Traffic seemed like a cruel enemy, every red light an obstacle in your path. His hands were sweating on the steering wheel. His heart was beating like a war drum. Would it be possible to change the future? To the ATN-21, he parked haphazardly on the sidewalk and ran out, pushing open the glass door of the cafe. The familiar smell of freshly brewed coffee filled his nostrils, but he didn't have time to think about it. His eyes searched the place until he found Michael, sitting exactly as in the recording, with his head down, distracted by his cell phone. The digital clock on the wall ticked 18:24. William hurried over to him. The killer would arrive at any moment. "Michael, get up!" William gasped, his voice full of urgency. Michael looked up, confused. "Dude, what the hell?" William pulled him by the arm, almost knocking him out of the chair. Every second counted. "We have to get out of here, now!" Michael resisted. "What the hell is going on? Are you crazy?" 26. The cafe door opened behind them. William felt his stomach sink. The killer was there, he didn't look back. I couldn't look. With force, he pulled Michael away from the table, almost dragging him. The moment the two passed the counter, the first shot was fired. The cafe descended into chaos. Screams, chairs tipping over, glasses breaking. William and Michael fell to the ground, but they were alive. The shot didn't hit anyone. The killer hesitated. The target wasn't where it was supposed to be. The future had already been changed. Customers threw themselves on the ground. Others ran in despair. Amid the confusion, the shooter realized that his plan had gone wrong and fled through the door. The sound of police sirens appeared in the distance, and in a matter of seconds, he disappeared into the crowd. William lay there, panting, his entire body shaking. He did it. He changed the future. But then, something happened. The cafe fell into an eerie silence. William looked around. People were still there, but something was wrong. The faces seemed blurred, as if their features were dissolving. The TV mounted on the wall began to buzz, static taking over the screen. William blinked a few times, trying to focus. His vision seemed distorted, as if the world itself was wrong. The tape didn't want him to alter events, and now the price for defying fate was about to be exacted. William arrived home with his mind on the verge of collapse. He managed to change the future. Michael was alive, the murder never happened. But something inside him screamed that that didn't mean he was saved. From the moment he left the cafe, the world felt wrong. The streets seemed darker than usual. The people around them had blank, almost unreal expressions. And now, alone in your apartment, he felt something was there with him. The first sign came with the noises. At first they were low, a soft slap on the floor, a scratch on the wall. But as the night progressed, the sounds intensified. Footsteps in the hallway, even when he knew he was alone. Low, almost imperceptible whispers resounding inside the empty rooms. William locked all the doors and windows, checking every corner of the apartment. But the feeling of being watched, I wasn't going away. It was then that the lights flickered. The TV turned on by itself, static filling the screen. The VCR, which he hadn't played since that afternoon, started playing the tape on its own. William felt his heart hammer against his chest. With a dry click, the image stabilized. It was his apartment. The camera was positioned in the room, capturing the exact same angle as where he was sitting now. But there was something terribly wrong with the recording. He was not alone. Behind his reflection on the screen was a tall, distorted shadow. Something was there, standing in the dark corner of the room, watching him. But when William turned to look, there was nothing there. He took a deep breath, trying to convince himself that his mind was playing tricks. But when he turned his eyes to the TV, the shadow had moved. Now it was right behind him. The video was interrupted by a high-pitched noise. The screen went black for a few seconds, and then slowly, a new image appeared. It was him. But it wasn't. An old recording. It was him sitting exactly where he was now, watching TV. In the video, his own reflection began to smile. But William wasn't smiling. The apartment was suddenly freezing cold. The tape was furious. She had been challenged, and now she wanted balance. If Michael was alive, then another life needed to be taken. A sound echoed behind him, a low, guttural whisper. William, I was no longer alone. William was no longer alone. After the failed assassination attempt in the cafe, he tried to convince Michael to forget everything, to move on with his life as if nothing had happened. But it was too late. Michael saw it. Not just the gun pointed at him, but something deeper, more indescribable. Since that day, I see things, William, Michael said, his voice shaking over the phone. Reflections that don't belong to me. People who aren't there. Last night, I looked at my cell phone screen and saw my own funeral. William's blood ran cold. Whatever was happening was now spreading. He spent the next few weeks obsessed with finding other cases. He scoured internet forums, rummaged through old files, tried to track down any other owners of the tape. It was then that he realized This curse was greater than he imagined. The records were fragmented, scattered among rumors and terrifying reports. Some names were repeated: Daniel Hargrove, the missing collector. A woman named Elise Marlowe, admitted to a mental institution after claiming she could see tragedies before they happened. A police officer named Victor Holloway found dead in front of a static television. William knew what that meant. Anyone who watched the tape was doomed. But there was something worse. In the last accounts he found, one phrase appeared again and again, like a grim warning left by those who had come before him. What is seen cannot be unseen, but if it is shared, it meets new eyes. William turned away from the computer, feeling a crushing weight in his chest. The ribbon wasn't just a cursed object. She was a virus. Every person watching didn't just see the future. They became part of him. And now Michael was infected. How many more would there be? William thought about how many people were in that cafe that night. How many saw death avoided? How many have unintentionally opened their eyes to something that should never have been seen? And how many more would see? William didn't want to watch the tape anymore. Every time I played it, something worse happened. But he needed to understand. I needed to find the origin of that. That night, sitting in the darkness of his apartment, he rewound the tape to the beginning. This time I would watch it frame by frame. He adjusted the playback speed and advanced slowly. Every scene, every detail, every shadow was analyzed in detail. And it was then that he saw something I never noticed before. In the corner of the screen, in all the filming, in all the tragedies, there was one man. It wasn't obvious at first glance. Sometimes her silhouette blended into the background, standing on the sidewalk. Other times it was a figure reflected in the window of a car. But he was always there, always watching. William froze. Who was he? Fast forward to the murder in the parking lot. There he was in the background, leaning against a wall, looking directly at the camera. It was for the coffee recording. He was there again, sitting near the entrance, motionless. His eyes burned with tension as he advanced another frame. And then, for the first time, the man moved. The silhouette slowly turned its head. He was looking at William. William's heart skipped a beat. No, that didn't make sense. He paused the video, swallowing hard. The figure was now facing the camera. But there was no face, just a shadowy void where the eyes and mouth should be. The tension in the air was palpable. William felt a chill crawl down his spine, and something inside him whispered that he shouldn't continue watching. But he ignored his instinct and went back a few frames. The man still had his back turned. It advanced again. The silhouette it was, no longer there. The apartment fell into absolute silence. William felt his breathing become irregular. Where was he? A crack came from the TV. The screen became covered in static. And then, William's reflection appeared on the screen. But behind him, inside the room itself, there was another figure. He turned his body in an instinctive reflex, his heart about to jump out of his chest. But there was nothing there. At least, not that. His eyes could see. William could no longer bear it. The tape was alive. The faceless man, the premonitions, the visions spreading like a disease. He needed to end this. Without hesitation, he ripped the tape out of the VCR and ran to the kitchen. He took scissors and tried to cut the magnetic film. But the blade just slid along, unable to pierce the material. It was like trying to cut steel with a butter knife. Frustrated, he grabbed a lighter and lit the flame. He held it against the tape, waiting for the fire to consume it. But to his horror, the plastic didn't even get hot. Panic began to take over. If he couldn't destroy her, then he could at least get rid of her. He ran downstairs to the building's trash can and threw the tape into the furthest trash can he could find. He closed the lid tightly as if he could seal the curse inside. But when he returned to the apartment, she was waiting for him, in the same place, about the VCR. William felt a deadly shiver run up his spine. That wasn't possible. He grabbed the tape again and ran to his car. This time it would take him to a distant place. Barry. I would play in the river. Anything to get her out of his life. He drove for hours until he found an isolated forest far from the city. He dug with his own hands, throwing dirt everywhere. When the hole was deep enough, he threw the tape in and quickly covered it. It was the end. With dirt on his hands, he got back into the car and drove home. Cold relief coursed through his body. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he might have escaped. But when opening the apartment door, the tape was on the table, exactly where it has always been. Despair took over him. William staggered back, his heart racing. It could not be destroyed. It couldn't be ruled out. Get out. I wanted to be seen, and he had no choice. William was arrested. The tape could not be destroyed. It couldn't be ruled out. She always came back. His nerves were on the verge of breaking down. The only thing worse than watching the tape was not watching it. Because now, every minute away from her made him wonder, what would come next? What tragedy was about to happen? Who would die this time? Trembling, he took the tape and put it in the VCR. This time, he would watch until the end. The hiss of the TV filled the room. The image flickered. But something was different. The camera showed a dark alley. It was night. The streetlights flickered dimly. The recording was shaking slightly, as if someone was holding the camera by hand. Then William saw yourself. He was there, on the screen, walking down the alley, the same coat, the same sneakers. Every detail was identical. His reflection in the video looked to the side as if he felt he was being followed. Fear was written all over his face. And then, a shadow appeared behind him, tall, skeletal, moving erratically. The same figure that appeared in the other tapes. The faceless man. William tried to run, but the creature moved too fast. Long, twisted arms grabbed him. His mouth opened, but just as before, there was no face, just a black void. The screen flickered violently. In the last visible frame, William was on the floor, his body motionless, his eyes open, staring into space. The recording paused automatically. The digital clock on the screen said 02-20-2025, 03:33. There were exactly 48 hours left until that date. William fell to his knees. He didn't see just another premonition. He saw his own death, and this time, there was no one to save him. William would not accept dying. Not like that. He spent the night awake, eyes fixed on his laptop screen, searching every dark corner of the internet. There was a pattern. The tape didn't come out of nowhere. She had an origin. Collector forums mentioned cursed tapes, but most of the stories were just unsubstantiated urban legends. However, among all the speculations, one name appeared again and again: Black Veil Pictures. William frowned. Black Veil Pictures? I had never heard of this producer. Further research revealed that Black Veil was a small, independent film studio in the 80s and 90s, specializing in experimental horror. Bizarre films, disjointed recordings, short films that defied any cinematic logic. But something happened. The studio closed suddenly in 1994, the same year that was written on the tape label. The strangest thing? None of Black Veil's productions existed anymore. No official catalog, no copies available. It was as if all the films had been erased from history, except one, the last movie. Lost article from a forgotten blog mentioned the producer's final project, a mysterious film that was never released. No official synopsis, no cast listed. Just a cryptic title, The Window of Tomorrow. William felt a shiver run up his spine. The Window of Tomorrow, like a vision of the future. According to vague reports, the few who saw the film described disjointed and distressing images. Scenes of people being watched without their knowledge. Tragedies happening before they actually occur. A camera that never belonged to anyone, only recorded the inevitable. The scariest detail? Those involved in production disappeared. All of them. Directors, screenwriters, editors. They disappeared without leaving a trace, and the only evidence of the film's existence was an unmarked VHS tape. The tape that was now in William's possession. He closed the notebook tightly, his heart racing. If this tape was indeed part of the lost film, then perhaps the answer lay there. But knowing the truth meant reach the end of the recording, and maybe he didn't want to see what was there. William felt he was getting close. If I wanted to survive, I needed to understand who created the tape. The only clue I had was Black Veil Pictures and the lost film, The Window of Tomorrow. But no one seemed to have concrete records about who directed this production. It was as if the director himself had been erased from history, until in one of the most obscure files on the internet, William found a name. Leonard Hawthorne, an experimental filmmaker from the 80s and 90s, known for his disturbing works and obsession with the idea of capture screen time. His films were described as unsettling, with scenes that seemed to peek into real-life moments without those involved knowing they were being recorded. Hawthorne disappeared in 1994, in the same year that Black Veil closed its doors and the tape appeared. No body was found, no explanation. It just disappeared. But there was something more. A digitized newspaper article mentioned that Leonard Hawthorne didn't just direct the film. He was on the set. He was the man on the tape. William's heart froze. The faceless man, the figure in all tragedies, the silent observer, Leonard Hawthorne. It didn't disappear. He was trapped inside the recording. William felt his breathing hitch. The tape didn't just show the future. She absorbed those who became part of the story. He thought about the other owners of the tape: Daniel Hargrove, Elise Marlowe, Victor Holloway. Everyone who watched until the end disappeared without a trace. The tape consumed them. And now, William was about to be next. But one last doubt burned his mind. If Hawthorne was still inside the tape, could he be freed, or worse? Would William take his place? Time was running out. William had less than 24 hours before his own death, but now he knew something that changed everything. The tape wasn't just a window into the future. It was a mechanism that shaped time itself. Every scene he had watched, it only existed because he saw it. The tragedies were not simple predictions. They were events that happened because he witnessed them. If William had never seen the coffee recording, the shooter might never have shown up. If I had never seen the murder in the parking lot, perhaps the victim was still alive. Get out, it wasn't a warning. It was a trigger, William remembered. The phrase he had found in the old files: what is seen cannot be unseen. But if it is shared, it meets new eyes. This is how the curse spread. Whoever watches it becomes part of it. Whoever sees it feeds the cycle. Each new spectator generates a new tragic event. And now, he understood what happened to Leonard Hawthorne. Man tried to capture time, but in doing so, he became his prisoner. The tape needed a new guardian. From William, it was the perfect choice. He felt a deadly chill run up his spine. That was it. Or he would find a way to break the cycle, or it would become part of him forever. William stared at the tape on the table, feeling the weight of fate crushing his shoulders. He knew what would happen if he did nothing. The tape had already shown him his end. In a few hours, he would die in the dark alley exactly as predicted. But now he understood the true horror. If he accepted his fate, only one more tragedy would be recorded. And the tape would continue. She would find a new owner, a new victim. The cycle would never end. He had to choose. Option 1, destroy the tape, or at least try. If the ribbon was a centerpiece of the curse, perhaps destroying it was the only way out. But all previous attempts failed. He tried to burn it, cut it, bury it, and it always came back. There was a possibility that I had not yet tested. Dispose of the tape in such a way that no one could ever find it. Maybe sink her in the ocean, seal her in concrete, bury her in the desert, or take it with you to the grave. But this idea was terrifying. What if in doing so, he became part of the recording? Option 2, pass the tape forward. William realized the second option with a lump in his throat. If the tape needed a guardian, perhaps he could choose someone to replace him. If someone else watched, the cycle could begin again without him needing to die. He could survive. But that meant condemning someone else. William felt his heart pound. What was more important? His own life, or stop the curse from continuing. The clock in the corner of the room ticked 03:20. He had just a few minutes left before his scheduled death time. He took a deep breath, knowing that any decision would have irreversible consequences. And so William chose. What he chose will be revealed in the last act. 30 so. William was standing in the middle of the room, the ribbon in his hands. The moment he feared so much had arrived. He could throw it into the ocean, bury it, try to destroy it again. But I knew it was useless. The tape always came back. It always found a new owner. His gaze fell on the turned-off TV. For an instant saw his own reflection in the dark screen. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, terror written in every feature. He looked like a condemned man. He knew what he needed to do. With shaking hands, he took out his cell phone and sent a single message to Michael. "Meet me at home. I need to show you something." Then he took the tape and inserted it into the VCR. This time he wouldn't try to escape. This time he would see what needed to be seen. The screen flickered and, as always, the flickering image appeared. The final destination. The dark alley. The shadowy silhouette approaching from behind. The scene that was already recorded in time. That he couldn't change. It was the moment of his death. But then something different happened. The camera rotated slowly, and William realized that the scene wasn't being recorded. It was being played live. His heart stopped. The video did not show a distant future. Showed the gift. The apartment was plunged into darkness. The lights flickered. The air became thick, heavy, as if the environment itself was folding around him. And then, the sound of a VCR rewinding came. From behind him, William's blood ran cold. He hadn't pressed rewind. He turned slowly. The TV now showed not the alley, but the very room where he was. Every detail, every object in the same place. And in the corner of the screen, he saw something that made his stomach turn. The silhouette. Inside the apartment. Before I could react, the video fast-forwarded, distorting into accelerated flashes. And then, he saw your own body fallen to the floor, eyes wide, lifeless. The TV turned off by itself. William was motionless, but I already knew. He turned slowly towards the darkness. Behind him, and before you scream, he understood. What is seen cannot be unseen, and now, he was part of the recording.